Hello?
Hey, is that Jim?
Yeah, it is.
Hi, Jim. It's Eric. How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing good. I had a little piece of something cut off my face today, like kind of near my forehead. I had this funky little spot that wouldn't go away. So I had it checked out, and sure enough, it was basal cancer. And it's not a big deal because it doesn't really spread. It just stays where it's at. But the dermatologist said, you got to come in and get this thing cut off. So I went in and had that done today. So my left eye is kind of numb still from the Novocaine, but I could talk just fine.
Welcome to Season 3 of the FNRad Snowboard Podcast.
Okay, perfect. 1 second, please.
Tala in ett meddelande efter tonen.
Hi, this is Sean. I'm not here right now.
You have reached Mike.
Hi, this is Jim. Leave me a message, and I will call you back as soon as I can.
Hi, you've reached Jeremy Jones.
Yeah, I'm going to call you back instead. Sorry, dude.
Jim Rippey. He was a prominent pro for Burton throughout most of the 90s, and the boards he designed are really indicative of the time that snowboarding was driven by the pro riders. I mostly remember Jim from his parts in the TV movies, but he was a really successful competitor, winning the US Open, the Innsbruck Air and Style, and Vans Triple Crown, and I think he got third in one of the X Games Big Airs. Most of you'll remember he was the first to flip a snowmobile. He talks about that story in this interview. I had a few preconceptions about Jim going into this, mostly that he was a snowboarding jock, but I was totally wrong. I knew that he was religious, and I didn't know he was going to talk about that. I'm not religious at all, but whatever. I don't judge him for being religious. Whatever works. You know what I mean? And we get into that a little bit. Actually, we get into that a lot by the end. I really enjoyed talking to Jim Rippey. I found him to be a very endearing and kind individual. The kind of guy who forgets how old he is.
I got to ask my wife how old I am. Just like... This is killing me. This is so funny. My dad used to do this all the time. How old am I? 46. Yeah, 46. I got a little bit of dyslexia, and sometimes I'll flip numbers in my head, and I'll just get confused and be like, I gotta figure this out.
Me too. I'm the same.
I've done a bunch of different jobs in the last 5 years, and so I've had to take tests to try to get jobs, and I did a test for the railroad, and I did a test for working as a correctional officer in California. And the test I did down in California, it was really difficult because it was all numbers and letters and having to do these problem solving type things and figure out stuff and use math. And I got towards the end of the test and I ran out of time, and I was just like, wow, that shouldn't have been that difficult for me. But something about just having a little bit of dyslexia, and just took me way longer to process what answers they were wanting to get, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just tell me what your name is again.
My name's Eric Trollson.
Okay, Eric, right on.
Yeah, so I grew up snowboarding. I was dying for someone to do a snowboarding podcast, so then I just decided to do it. Actually, I started by calling Sherman Poppin. You know who that is?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I called Sherman, and he was and we did a quick phone interview, and then I called Dmitry Milovich.
I'm not sure if I know who that one is. What was the name again?
Dmitry Milovich. So he did Winter Stick before Burton, in the 70s, early 70s. And then Sean Farmer at Mount Baker, and that was really my first pro rider interview. That was 3 years ago now.
Cool.
You're a California guy, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I grew up in a small mill town in Northern California called Quincy, and its population maybe 6,000. And we do have this little ski area called Johnsville, and Johnsville was actually the first place that people skied in the Sierras. It's just a little ski area with 2 Palma lifts and a rope tow.
Rad.
But my dad was a school teacher, and they had a ski program, so he would drive the equipment truck with all the kids' skis in the back of it up to Johnsville. And so one day a weekend, we would go up there to go skiing. So I started skiing when I was pretty young, but I was just a weekend warrior. I would just get one day here, one day there. So in a whole season, maybe get to go a handful of times. Mm-hmm. So even though I started young, I didn't, can't compare it to like somebody who actually lives at a mountain where they get to ride all the time, or some of the kids in Europe, you know, who it's kind of part of the culture where you're taking cross-country skis to school, you know, and for lunch break you go out and go skiing. I mean, it was nothing like that. It was kind of just, you know, just dabbling in skiing for fun. And every once in a while he'd take me to Tahoe. He took me to a couple places in Tahoe. I think we went to like Heavenly once, and then maybe like Boreal or someplace up on Donner Summit. I think I went to Donner Ski Ranch once or something when I was a kid. I didn't start snowboarding full time until I got out of high school. And what had happened was I graduated and I was going to pursue being a punter, you know, kicking a football on fourth down, you know, when you punt to the other team. And I was pretty good at that in high school. And so I thought, well, you know, my dad was ex-military. He said, you know, you might want to go into the military if you're not sure what you want to do. And I didn't feel like I wanted to go into the military. So I thought, you know what, I'll pursue this punting thing, and went to a school down in Santa Cruz and signed up and stuff. And their football team was pretty bad, actually. And right before our first game, I was like, this isn't the school I need to be at. And so I left there, came back to Quincy, and that winter helped my dad out with the volleyball varsity team and got a job working at Round Table Pizza. You know, was planning on just going back to school the next year. And I ran into this one guy in Quincy. He was the only guy that snowboarded. His name was Brad Turner. He's like, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm just, you know, kind of hanging out. I'm going to go to a different school next year, maybe go punt down at Butte College. And he goes, well, what are you doing right now? I said, oh, nothing, just kind of help my dad out with the volleyball team. He goes, man, you should come to Tahoe with me. And I'm like, well, why? You know, and he goes, oh, you know, I go to Tahoe and I work as a lift operator. And I was like, well, what do you do? And he goes, nothing. You just stand there and you just watch people ski and you load them onto the chair and you really don't have to do anything. And then on your time off, you can just go ski. So I was like, wow, that sounds like a perfect job. You know, no boss breathing over your neck. And so I quit the Round Table deal and moved up to Donner Ski Ranch with my buddy Brad Turner, and got a job as a lift operator. And that first night that we went for orientation, they had one chairlift open. And at that time, I'd never really seen snowboarding. I knew my friend Brad snowboarded. I'd seen him make a couple turns up at Bucks Lake, which is near Quincy, one time, and it looked pretty cool, but didn't get to see much of it, just a couple turns. And then when I got to Donner Ski Ranch that first night of orientation, they had one chairlift open and they had a light on. There was a couple guys coming down making turns that were good. And I just remember going, wow, that looks like so much fun. I mean, it looked like surfing and skateboarding on snow, and to see the fluidity of it. I just remember going, I want to try that. And so, you know, that first year, anytime I got a chance, I'd go to the rental shop and rent a board and started snowboarding. And so that's how it all kind of started.
Like, what kind of board would you have been on?
The first board I rented was actually a really great board to learn on. It was a Kemper 165. I think it was called a freestyle or something like that. It was I think it was blue. And as far as my memory serves me, it didn't have a lot of camber. It was pretty flat, and it didn't have a ton of side cut. So it was a very, you know, beginner friendly board.
Totally.
And I took that over to Boreal at night my first couple times, and then, you know, as you know, once you figure out how to turn on a snowboard, the progression is really fast. And you know, you start learning quick, and it's just so exciting because the freedom you have to, you know, try different stuff, it's just right there. And so that was kind of the start.
That's incredible. Did you surf and snowboard?
I skateboarded, and I was one of maybe a handful of people in Quincy that skateboarded, because there really wasn't many places to skate. I mean, you could go down to like the courthouse, and there was like an Elks Lodge near my house that had some pavement and some curbs and some steps you could ollie and stuff like that. But there wasn't a lot to skate back then. But I did skate, and I was into it and really enjoyed it. And I had a cousin who lived in Santa Cruz. He was a chiropractor there. And so my dad would take me to Santa Cruz sometimes to visit my cousin. And I'd go and boogie board and stuff there. When I first started getting in the ocean, it was, you know, playing around on a boogie board. And then finally I got a surfboard and I started to surf. But because of the, you know, how much I'd actually get to surf, I never, you know, was able to get that great at it. But, you know, I could go down the line and make some turns and just, I was still a beginner's pace though, because I'd get a couple days here, a couple days there.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my dad loved to go to Hawaii. So on Christmases, my dad was pretty funny. Like, we lived in a double wide trailer. We didn't have a lot of money. He was a school teacher. But the thing that he really loved to do was to go on vacations. And so when he'd get those summers off or even Christmas vacation, we'd always go to cool places. So he loved Hawaii, and we'd go to Hawaii quite a bit. And so, have you been to Hawaii before?
I have.
The frequency of the waves there
Yeah.
in Hawaii is just, there's so many more waves. You have such an advantage, like the Hawaiian surfers now. I guess, John Flores, he's like the first Hawaiian to win a world title. He just won the world title, and that kind of surprises me that he's the first guy to have a world title from Hawaii, because the waves there are just so much better, and there's so many more waves, and you just spend more time up on the surfboard actually surfing. Whereas in California, it's like, we get good waves every once in a while, but it's pretty fickle, if there's got to be a swell. I mean, I lived 2 years down in San Diego, and it was like there were swells every once in a while, but most of the time it's like, a foot, a foot or two. And you're not, you get up on a wave and you make, a couple turns and the wave's done.
Yeah.
And in Hawaii, man, I'd go over to Hawaii for, like 10 days with my dad, and that 10 days I'd just surf my brains out. And by the time I came back, I'd go to some place like Santa Cruz and feel a lot more confident, and go out there and catch a lot more waves and stuff like that. So anyway. What
part of Hawaii would you surf?
Yeah, we were on Oahu.
Yeah.
We also went to a couple of the other islands too.
Yeah.
We went to Kauai a couple times, and Maui, and then we went to the Big Island one time. But Oahu was the best. It's just got the most breaks. The thing that Hawaii kind of taught me with surfing is that we're products of our environment. And if you are in the water and there's a lot of waves, you start progressing quick and building confidence and starting to, it's interesting how when you're in the ocean and you spend a lot of hours surfing, you start to kind of get into the rhythm of the ocean, where when you're paddling for the waves or even paddling out, you're doing it and you're not having to give as much effort. Like if you watch good surfers, like when you're just learning how to surf and you just try to paddle out through sets and stuff like that, you're expending so much energy just to try to get out there. And then when it's time to catch a wave, your shoulders are burning and you're like trying to get up and you're fumbling and like maybe one hand slips off and you're just flailing around. But like the more you're out there, you just like subconsciously start to get into the rhythm of the ocean, where you start to catch waves and it doesn't take as much effort. It's a really cool thing.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing in snowboarding. It's like a lot of times people will look at the level of a professional snowboarder and just be like, I don't even know how you could attain that level. And it's just like, well, the way you attain that level is by doing it a lot. You start off by hitting those small jumps, and then you're hitting a little bit bigger jumps, and before you know it, you're flying at jumps. You're hitting, going off a jump, going 40 miles per hour and flying 60 feet through the air, and you actually feel comfortable doing it because you've progressed into that, and it's become not second nature, but you've become a part of your environment without even really realizing it. You're comfortable in that, and other people look at that and go, wow, that would scare the heck out of me. Well, you've done it so much that it's not a big deal. It's still a rush, but it's not like you're fearing for your life,
Right. So where was the first transition into professional snowboarding for you? Further down the line?
I just praise God, where he had me at in the beginning of my career was such a perfect place, because Donner Ski Ranch was where Burton, basically they had a team back then, so 89-90, so it would have been the 1990 season. They actually had a coach for their team, and they had their what you'd call like their A team. They would practice running gates and doing freestyle. So most of the team, besides doing freestyle, raced as well. And so they were actually training at Donner Ski Ranch. And the team was called Cross M every morning at 9 o'clock. And so I'd be out there loading the chairlifts, and I'm looking at these guys who are making a living being professional snowboarders. And I never even knew that existed. Even though I had a friend who liked to snowboard,
right,
I didn't know it could be lucrative for somebody to actually be a professional snowboarder. So I saw those guys there all the time. And as I started to get good like my first year, towards the end of my first year, I started winning some contests and feeling confident on a board and seeing those guys making a living doing it. At the end of that first year, I had met the Burton rep and I'd talked to him about, maybe sponsorship, and he had seen the couple results I had and said, you know what, I'd be willing to loan you a snowboard for next year and get you your clothing and your boots and stuff for pro form. So that was my first level of sponsorship.
At the end of your first year. That's incredible.
Yeah. So I met Laurent, who is the California Burton rep. I met him in line at Donner Ski Ranch, found out that he was the rep, went out and went riding with him and, just tried to do stuff to show off and basically impress him because I knew he was a rep. And then I said, hey, how do you go about getting sponsored? And he said, well, usually the best way to do it is to go do some contests and then get some results and then bring that to me, and then I'll see what I can do. And so I did 4 contests my first year, and I had 3 firsts and a third. Did good as an amateur. You got to remember that back then, these contests were pretty rinky-dink. If you could do a J-tear on the front side hit in a pipe, or do something sick right in front of the judges, maybe there was 4 hits and a half pipe, 6 hits and a half pipe. So I remember the first contest I did was at this ski area called Homewood, and it was a snowstorm. And there was probably 6 hits in this crappy pipe. And there was one decent hit right where the judges were sitting. And I remember I had one trick that was okay. I don't even think it was a J-tear. It was something different. But I just remember doing one good trick out of 6 hits, and I won. And so it didn't take much. I mean, there was probably 10 guys in the contest, and it was in the snowstorms.
What was the board you were riding at that time?
I saved up the money, and my first board was a Burton Air. And it was the one that was purple. And, I'd asked the team riders, what do you think I should get? Because the Craig Kelly and that Air were very similar in shape and size.
Totally.
And they said, you should get the Air because it's a little bit stiffer, and the Craig Kelly's a little softer. And if you're only going to have one board, you want something a little bit stiffer so that it doesn't get too flexed out on you. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I went and bought a Burton Air. That was my first board.
That Burton Air would have been a great board to come up on and to ride. That would have been the 90 year. Your first pro model on Burton is what, 90?
Let's see. Yeah, maybe 94. I don't even know, man.
How many years did they do a Jim Rippey board?
7 years.
You were in that heyday where the pros drove the brands. You put a lot of thought in those boards. I read the entire post when you sold your quiver. Did you sell that, by the way?
I did.
Yeah, so I read that entire post and I was like, this is incredible.
Rad. The guy who bought it from Canada, the snowboard shop he owns is the Source or whatever. Yeah, and I guess he's got a couple different shops up there. Mm-hmm. He ended up buying it, and he said, I purchased this set. This is awesome because this way, without having to save all those, I can get them all.
Yeah, that's so rad. Well, that koi board too, it came in gold, right?
Yeah, it came in gold, dark blue, and you mentioned a teal. There was a couple different blues.
Yeah.
And then gold.
In Canada, a shipment of the gold Rippey boards was a part of a train hijacking engineered by the Hells Angels.
Nice.
And at one point, the Hells Angels had a stock of these gold Rippey boards before they'd come out. Isn't that insane?
That is insane.
Yeah, so what was it like being a pro in that era?
It was a dream come true, and as I started having some success in snowboarding, like any kid would, to have a pro model, to have your own pro model would just be like a dream come true, where you could actually design it to work how you want it to work, and to pick out the paints and the graphics and do everything just like you want it. That's just a dream come true. So when I finally got that, yeah, it was awesome. And then basically I'd come up with an idea, and then I had to communicate that with Burton. And because they're on the East Coast and I was on the West Coast, there were times where it was kind of frustrating because I'd be like, I really want to try to do this color, or I want to do this way. and then they'd ship me one and it wouldn't be the way that I wanted. And they're like, oh, we already made a bunch of these ones. And I'm like, you can't do that. Like, you gotta let me see it first and be sure that it's like cause so there's a few times where there was like some slip ups, like with that koi board. I told him, I said, I'd like to do a red, but it's got to be done right. And I was trying to get like a pearlescent red, or no, I was looking for a metallic red.
Yeah.
And metallic, you very rarely will see metallic red, but if it's done right, it looks really cool. And I remember they did this one red board, and then they took like just regular metal flake and sprinkled it over the red color. And so it made the board almost have a pinkish hue to it.
Yep.
And I remember seeing that and being like, no, that one can't fly. And they were like, oh, we already sent, a couple thousand of those out. I'm like, you can't do that. Like, I told you that I would do a red if it was right, but that was not right.
So between Pro Form and Pro Model, what are you doing in those years? Are you still working as a lifty, or are you?
Yeah, so the first 3 years that I was in Tahoe, I worked as a lift op. I take that back. I worked my first 2 years as a lift op. So my first year was at Donner Ski Ranch.
Yep.
And then my next year was at Boreal. And the reason I worked at Boreal is because they had night skiing. So I thought, well, I'll work as a night lift op. That way I can ride during the daytime, and I can, if I get a chance to film, I can still do it and then show up for work that night. So my second year, I did the amateur snowboard series in California. It's called the Cal Series. And I ended up winning the overall for both combined racing and freestyle. And then I won the overall for freestyle, and I got second for racing. Then my sponsorship got upped a little bit, where now it was like, instead of just getting to borrow a board for the year, I think my second year it was like, okay, you get 2 full setups, 2 snowboards, 2 bindings.
Did they
2
encourage
outfits.
you to get like a freestyle board and a race board, or?
Once I had gotten Burton behind me, where I could actually start to choose what I wanted to do, I stopped racing.
Yeah.
And I just focused on freestyle. So my third year, I did the PSTA, and I wasn't winning these half-pipe contests. I mean, it was all the best half-pipe riders in the world, and I didn't really ride half-pipe that much, and we didn't really have any great half-pipes in Tahoe. Like, the half-pipes were still super ghetto, so when I'd show up at a pipe contest with like a decent pipe, there was guys that were riding pipe all the time, and I'd just barely get to ride it. I think I had some top 10s, but I wasn't like finishing top 3. But during that time, they'd have like half pipe, and maybe they'd have a slope style or a big air. And I'd do pretty good at the slope style, and I'd do pretty good at the big air. But kind of the way I got noticed was, or got that break to kind of like go to a photo shoot, I think was my first big break. But Tim Pogue was the team manager for Burton, and he saw me at one of the PSTA events, and I talked with him and stuff. And then I think overall that year for the PSTA, I might have finished like 7th or something. Top 10, but not like winning. Tim Pogue said, hey, I'd like to invite you to our Burton photo shoot in Colorado. Right. And so that was my first big break. I went out there and really just did everything I possibly could to get good photos and do what I could do, and had a really great photo shoot. We had good snow and a good crew of riders.
How were you on photo shoots? Was that where you kind of lit up?
Yeah, and I've always in interviews and stuff, I've said some things about being a bit of a show off,
sure,
or a stuntman. And people kind of take that wrong because, in snowboarding, they like to act really cool, like they don't really care. But come on, let's face it. Like, if you're a great snowboarder, you like to show what you can do, and you have to be a performer almost. So when I got a chance, to go to a Burton photo shoot for the biggest company in the world, this is my big shot. I'm going to try to do everything I possibly can to get dope photos and really push myself. And that's what I did. And we had good snow and good photographers, and I went out and got a ton of shots. And so that next year, I just remember getting a lot of magazine shots and a lot of coverage, and that was just like awesome, getting in the Burton catalog. And then the door opened kind of up for me to where I started making a little bit of money, and I could choose what I wanted to do. And my main focus, you mentioned Damian Sanders.
Yep.
Damian Sanders and Steve Graham, those guys were my first heroes in snowboarding because, in California, we didn't have big contests that would come there where we could see all the top snowboarders. The heroes to us were those guys in those videos. So those early fall line movies, I remember watching those over and over again, and then going out and riding, and just like, you know, that was what really got you pumped up. So as soon as I got Burton kind of behind me with a little bit of money and a little bit of a travel budget, I switched my focus from contests to getting in the snowboard movies. And then through having some success in the snowboard movies and starting to get some solid parts in those movies, that's kind of how, like, I remember kind of I got the cover of like TB4, I think it was. Yep. TB3 or TB4, and had a solid part in that movie. And then that was when I got my pro model. And then after I got my pro model and focusing on filming, I kind of thought, you know, if you want to consider yourself to be one of the best, I believed you should be able to not only have the good snowboard parts in the movies, but also be able to win the biggest contest in the world. So I remember kind of taking my focus and going, okay, I want to win some of these big air contests, like the biggest ones, you know, like Aaron Style and Innsbruck and the Vans Triple Crowns and, you know, the bigger events. And so I started focusing on that, and, you know, praise God, I was able to go out and win most of the major big air contests, and then also, you know, get the parts in the movies. And so that was basically what I did for, close to a decade, you know?
Yeah. And there's a backflip off a cliff that sticks in my mind.
TB4. I'll tell you a funny story about the backflip on that big cliff in Juneau. Terry and myself, and then I think it was Victoria Jalouse, Mike Hatchett and Dave Hatchett. I think it was just Mike. He rented this like cabin that was like a kind of a fishing village. And the thing about Juneau is it's beautiful and it's got these big, awesome mountains, but it's also gets more rain than almost any place on the earth. So it's cloudy a lot. And so we went there, and I remember just being like stuck in this house for like probably at least a week. We were there for probably, you know, a full week of just crappy weather. Yeah. And so we were playing ping pong and going out in these kayaks in the ocean, and there's a rope swing, and we were like, you could put on a wetsuit and go launch off this rope swing. And we were just doing whatever we could to stay sane while we were waiting for the sun to come out. Yeah. And so, you know, when so much rides on you having a good part in this snowboard movie, you only get maybe 10 days that are like those Bluebird days where the snow is good and you can actually just go for it. And so we were starting to panic. And so we finally got a clear day, and we landed the helicopter, and I looked over to my far left and I saw that cliff. And I just remember going like, that is a sick looking cliff. And Terrier wanted to do something just that was right below us. He wanted to just do a few turns down this steep face or something like that. And I was like, hey, Mike, I'm going to head over to that cliff. That thing looks sick. And he's like, okay, I'm going to shoot the shot of Terrier, and then I'll come over there after. I was like, okay, cool. So I went over to that cliff, and I started looking at it, and I was like, man, this thing is sweet. And so I started packing my run in, and then Mike came over there, and first time I flipped it, and I landed. I was on a 154. My pro model back then was just a small board. Yeah. And so I did this, like, you know, laid out backflip, and I came around and landed right on my board, and of course the nose buries, and I go over the bars, and then, you know, my goggles got all jacked up and stuff, and so my next shot, you know, I had my goggles on backwards because I wanted to have that Oakley, you know, logo there. But on my second time, was able to basically, I land, and when I landed, I almost caught a little bit of air out of the landing because that board was so small that stomping it down kind of made it almost pop out of the snow. And I remember doing like a quick kind of little 360 on top of the snow riding out of it. And that was the very first thing I did after sitting for a week, was that big backflip. And that was the box cover right there. The reason I was going for it so much right out of the box was, first of all, I found a perfect cliff. Second of all, we were so antsy. And like I said, you only get a couple days like that where you can like really go for it. So it was just like, dude, I've been sitting for a week, and the first thing I'm going to do is jump this like 45, 50 foot cliff and flip it. Like it was pretty intense.
That's insane. So did you grow up doing flips off of cliffs into water or anything like that? Like
I said, my dad was a school teacher, so I kind of grew up being a little bit of a gym rat. And I did swim team growing up and stuff, and we had like a 12-foot high diving board at our pool, and I could do 1.5. I could do double flips off a diving board, just hucking. But as far as learning how to do big slow flips, I did do some flips off of cliffs in the water, like maybe 50-footers. But back then, I didn't really know how to do gainers. Kind of learned that after I learned it in snowboarding. So in snowboarding, once you do a backflip, you're like, wow, felt that pop, and then that layout where, once you get the first half of it, you see your landing and it comes right around and it's just perfect. And then when you do bigger flips, then you just got to slow them down a little bit. So flipping off a cliff like that, it was pretty scary. I remember that one in particular because it was a flat, almost cornice type takeoff. And so typically when you flip, you do it off a transition and it makes it pretty easy to flip. But when you flip off a flat takeoff, you really kind of got to huck it a little bit, like, and be sure you tighten those abs and like get the board to come with you.
How did you come up with the idea to flip the snowmobile? Like in my mind, you were probably the first person to flip a sled.
Praise the Lord. Yes, I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically coming back from Alaska one time, I was with Rich Van Every, and there was a magazine shot of this kid trying to do one. And basically what he did was he went off the takeoff, he started getting the snowmobile to flip, and then as soon as the snowmobile got upside down, he let go. The snowmobile came around and landed right on top of him, and it pushed him down into the snow, and it broke his back. He ended up getting life flighted out of there, and he ended up being okay. He wasn't paralyzed, but it did break his back.
Yeah.
And but I remember seeing that sequence, and it just, in my mind, it all made sense. The Bible talks about a peace that surpasses understanding, that God will give you a peace that surpasses understanding. And when I saw that, I knew I could do it, and I actually had a peace about it. Typically, when you're thinking about doing things that are really scary where you could possibly die, there's not a lot of peace. You kind of fight through the anxiety to make something happen, and it's scary the whole time. But with the backflip on the snowmobile, I knew I could do it, and it was really weird. Not only did I have that peace about it, but also just mechanically it made sense, because when you first start jumping snowmobiles, you learn really quick. Okay, so like when you hit a jump on a snowmobile, for some reason, your natural reaction is to pin the throttle. But when you pin the throttle, you've instantly got like 100 miles per hour at track speed, and the nose of the snowmobile comes up in the air. So when you land track first, it then throws you into the handlebars, and you learn real quick, okay, I don't want to do that. So you either keep the throttle where it's at or actually let off the throttle a little bit so the snowmobile will level off and you'll land flat. So I thought, gosh, if you had the right jump and you opened the throttle wide open after you left the takeoff, and you stayed with the snowmobile and didn't let it get away from you, there's no reason that thing won't come around. So I found a place in Utah, went out there. It was, Rich Van Every actually told me, he said, I'm going to film a segment for Sled Next of this kid named Dan, and he lives in Salt Lake. And I said, well, I really want to do this backflip. He kind of tried to talk me out of it, said, I think it's a really bad idea for you to try to flip a snowmobile. I don't think the weight of it will actually allow it to flip. I said, well, I disagree. I just need to find the right place to build a jump. So I came out there, found this big wind lift, and I spent a full day. I just remember I shoveled like 8 hours by myself. And I had this crappy like little shovel, and I just remember sitting there, and I had like a power bar and some water, and I just sat there and I just shoveled. So I get this thing pretty much done, and then we ended up leaving that day. The next morning I woke up and it was raining. I remember my wife called me, or she was my fiance at the time, and she said, there's a gnarly storm in Tahoe and it's coming your way. And so if you're going to do anything out there filming wise, you pretty much need to make it happen today or tomorrow. The sun's going to be gone. And she knew that I was thinking about the flip, but I don't know if she knew that I was really going to go for it or not. I think I might have kept it kind of a secret because she thought it was a really bad idea too, and she thought I was going to kill myself.
So did everybody. They show the first attempt and the sled almost falls on you. Like, we were afraid for you.
I'll share this with you because it's just kind of a neat story, that kind of the way that day went.
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt here and tell you about our sponsors, the Boardroom Snowboard Shop in Vancouver. Go to boardroomshop.com and enter offer code FNRad at checkout for 10% off regular priced items and 5 off all sale items. The Boardroom offers a huge selection of the best quality products. They offer a performance guarantee and a lowest price guarantee on everything they sell. They ship to Canada and the United States. All right, and also Wired Snowboards. Go to wiredsnowboards.com, buy a board, because if you guys buy 10 boards this year, I get a free board next year. Wired Snowboards are meticulously engineered. Get a hand-pressed board from Rob Dow at wiredsnowboards.com. Enter offer code FNRad at checkout for 10 off. All right, back to the show.
I wake up and it's dumping rain and it's cloudy, and I'm just like, no, I'm going to get shut down here. I had flown a photographer out there, and then also I had talked to another filmer besides Rich Van Every who was going to come and film. So I had 2 filmers, 2 photographers. One of the photographers was going to set up a tripod with the video camera as well. So I had this crew together, and so I wake up that day, and it's cloudy and it's raining. And so I actually went back to sleep because I thought, well, it's done, I'm shut down. And so I slept until like maybe 9:30, and I got up, and this kid had a trampoline in his backyard, and I went and I was jumping on his trampoline. I was kind of looking at the sky, and I started to see little holes of sun. And I thought, you know what, let's get up there, because who knows, we might get a sucker hole and I might actually get a chance to do it. So we went up there, and this is at the backside of Brighton. That ski area was actually closed, and we were able to just pull in there and unload our sleds and kind of get to the backside of it. So we got back there where this wind lip was, and I still needed to do a little bit of work on it. So I was, kind of working on my takeoff, and all of a sudden, a sucker hole came out. This might be the only time I see the sun today. So I started up my snowmobile. I knew that takeoff wasn't right yet. It was still too steep. Yeah. I needed to chisel it out some more. And so the first attempt, I hit that takeoff, the snowmobile just G'd out, and it just took all my speed. And so it made the snowmobile go straight up, and I pinned the throttle. What was good about that slam was that I felt that snowmobile totally wanting to come around, and I stuck the nose in. I went over the handlebars, bruised my thighs on the handlebars, and loosened my bars, but I felt that snowmobile wants to do this. And so I remember we pulled the snowmobile out, and the sun was still shining, and so I chiseled my takeoff, and we're fully panicking, and somebody tightened my handlebars, and they duct taped my throttle. And so literally 5 minutes later, I'm on the sled again, going for a second attempt before the sun goes away. So I hit the takeoff this time, and I power through it a little bit, but I still hadn't chipped enough of it away. So the snowmobile kind of did the same thing. It G'd out in the takeoff, took a lot of my speed away. Snowmobile went straight up. I pinned the throttle. Snowmobile did a full flip, but it was completely sideways. And so I had to jump off of it, and I landed right next to it on the top. And then the clouds came in just right after that, and it socked in. So I was like, okay, I've got some time. Now I can patiently make my takeoff right. And so probably 2 hours later, really late in the day, but I've got my takeoff good now. And I'm just waiting, hoping that I'm going to get another shot at this. And then finally, we got another little sucker hole where the sun came out for just a couple minutes. And so my third attempt, I hit that takeoff. Everything felt good. The takeoff was smooth this time. And I nailed the throttle and held that thing wide open. And I remember the snowmobile rotating. I'm arched out. I'm looking at my landing. And something about the sound of that snowmobile being wide open was kind of scary. So while I was upside down and it was screaming and I felt like the rotation was right, I let go of the throttle, and it slowed the rotation so much that I dug in my ski, threw me over the handlebars. So I came really close to getting it on that third attempt. And then right after my landing, the clouds socked in again. And then I fixed my takeoff, went back to my start zone, and then sun popped out again. And in my mind, I was thinking it wasn't because I let go of the throttle that I under-rotated. I was thinking it was because I didn't go big enough. And it wasn't until later that I watched the footage and remembered that it was me letting off the throttle that made it not work on that third attempt. But at the time, I thought, you just didn't go big enough. You need to go a little bit bigger. So my fourth attempt, I overshot it big time. I came at the thing too fast. I remember being upside down, like probably 20 feet off the ground, and looking down at this flat landing, like thinking, dude, you way overshot this. And then right before I landed, I let go, and I landed with my feet on the seat, and it was the most impact that I've ever felt. I jumped up and I kind of did a check of my body, like, okay, is my back broken? Are my knees blown out? And I moved around and I was okay. I could feel my heart beating in my feet because it felt like I jumped out of a 2-story building and landed on concrete. I mean, it was really, really hard. But for some reason, I was okay. And the interesting thing is, too, that there was a cliff band below us. And so every time I would crash, I had a guy down there who was wearing motocross boots. He was like a total sled neck, just redneck guy. But his job in the whole thing was to catch my sled when I would crash, because if it got down past this certain area, it was going to go off these cliffs down there. And so I remember that guy. He's running behind the snowmobile as fast as he can, and he's like going like the same speed as the snowmobile. And he dove, and he got the ass end of the bar that's on the back of a snowmobile.
Yep.
He grabbed onto that, and he held on with one hand, and the snowmobile was dragging him. His body dragging behind it slowed it down enough to where he could get on top of it and put the brake on it.
Oh my
And
God.
so it's kind of like everyone there was just going like, oh my gosh, like what the heck? Rippey just almost broke his back and killed himself. And this guy just barely caught his snowmobile. At that point, it's probably 6 o'clock in the evening. The sky went back to black, and it starts dumping rain. It looked like I had come so close and been shut down. And I remember telling my friend, get on your snowmobile and zip up to that ridge line and look out and see if there's any more sucker holes coming. And he did, and he came back down. I fixed my takeoff, and it's dumping rain. And I said, what does it look like? He said, dude, we're done. It was like 50-mile-per-hour winds, too. This gnarly storm from Tahoe had finally gotten there. And he was like, we need to leave, man. I know you've come really close, but we need to take off because the storm is going to be really bad, and we need to get out of the backcountry. I said, you know what, Rich? I've come so close. Have a little bit of faith and just stay with me. And so he's like, okay, man. And so we're all sitting there in the rain. I went to my start area, and I prayed. And I said, Lord, I've come so close to getting this. And I promise you that if I am able to do it, I'll give you the glory for it. So I said, in Jesus' name I pray, amen. And after I said that, the rain instantly stopped. It like opened up right above the jump, and the sun came down and just hit the jump. And it was the only place in the whole valley that the sun was hitting. Not only did the sun come out, but it was kind of like we were just hearing this like, oh, like not literally, but like we were all going like, oh my gosh, like here it is, here's our chance. So I start up my snowmobile, and I come at it nice and slow, and then right towards the bottom of the transition, start putting on the throttle, and then right in that last probably 4 feet of the jump, that's when I would just wrap the throttle, and I just hit it and held it wide open, and the snowmobile came around and landed perfect. And I just remember I pointed up to the sky, and it was really neat too, because I ended up winning the ESPN Feat of the Year for that. So I got up on stage in front of all these like rock stars and famous people that were there, because it was a music and sports awards. So it was like, Metallica was there, and like Pink was there. I remember I got up on stage and I said, first and foremost, I want to thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, because I'm a pro snowboarder. I'm not a pro snowmobiler. And I rode my snowmobile 3 times last winter. And so the fact that I'm standing here as the first person to do this is just a gift from God. So praise God. And, the only bummer was when I watched the show, they cut that out of my speech. That show they put on TV was like all the other awards that whole night. Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer, like he gave his speech, and all these other people got up and gave their speeches, and they let them play in their entirety. And then I get up there and I only talked for like 30 seconds, and they cut it to like 10 seconds, and they cut out the part where I gave the praise God for that, which kind of bummed me out. But it was just like, whenever I talk to people about that, I try to share with them the story of the Lord bringing out the sun and allowing me to do that.
How did the other guys react to that? How did the group react to it's a miracle, right?
How do they react about me flipping the snowmobile?
About the God part of it. They witnessed that, right? Did that just blow minds or what?
Yeah, I think it did, and I think it got them all thinking, you know.
Did you grow up religious?
So I didn't get saved until the age of 30.
Okay.
And I grew up not going to church or anything. My dad raised me, and I was in Alaska.
Yep.
And I'd gotten dropped off on this mountaintop. The filmer was going to go to another area to film a shot of a different rider. And so I was told, we'll be back in an hour. And so I was on top of this run, and I was starting to think about, you know, how do I want to do it? Okay, I'm going to put 2 turns there, and then I'm going to jump off that, and then I'm going to put a couple turns there, and then my out will be right there. And so I'm kind of looking at it, and it's just like sparkling powder. And I just remember thinking, man, this is a perfect run I'm about to go down. And I just started kind of getting giddy, you know, like you would feel standing on top of a perfect run. You know, you're just like, feel like a little kid in a candy store. So I'm looking at this thing just going like, oh man, this is perfect. And then I looked to the right of that, and I saw another perfect run. And I thought, oh man, I'd love to ride that too. And then I look to the right, and I see another one, and then another one. And I look up on the horizon line, and as far as I could see was just peak after peak after peak of just sparkling powder. And then I looked to the left, and I could see the ocean in the background. And in the Bible, in the book of Romans, it talks about how when we see God's creation, we're seeing his thumbprint, and we're taken back by it. When we're in awe of like a huge waterfall or a huge cliff, you know, in that moment, we're seeing the thumbprint of the Creator. So I knew nothing about religion. I knew nothing about anything. All I knew is what I was looking at was too perfect to be by chance. And I remember just throwing up a prayer going, God, I don't know if you're real, but if you are, thank you for making this, because it's absolutely perfect. And so I started to see that thumbprint. I came home from that trip, and I bought a Bible. And I started reading it from the beginning. And the Bible's like 70% Old Testament. And then it's like New Testament's where Jesus is born, and then what he did in his 33 years of life. And so I started at the beginning, you know, and I got maybe 160 or 70 pages into it. And I started to bog down a little bit in some of these Old Testament books. I remember calling Dave Downing. Him and Shannon had gotten married, Shannon Dunn Downing. And I had heard that he was a Christian. Him and Shannon had gotten a place in Tahoe. And so I called him, and I said, hey, man, I heard you're a Christian, and I bought a Bible. Do you know of any good churches? And he said, well, I went to a church in Truckee called Sierra Bible, and it was a good church. I think you'd enjoy it. I went to church that day by myself, and this is just a small church. And I sat in the back of the room, and the pastor started to share the message. And he started to read out of the New Testament. He started to read the words of Jesus. He read like maybe half a chapter or something. I knew every word that he said, like I had read it 1,000 times, but I'd never read it before. So I started having this supernatural experience. And so I closed my eyes, and I basically just kind of prayed in my heart, and I just said, God, you must be real, because I've never read this, and yet I know it like it's tattooed on my heart. And right at that moment, I got filled up with like joy and contentment and peace that I'd never experienced in life. And like even through some of the successes I had in snowboarding and, you know, making good money and winning contests, when the Lord touched me with his Holy Spirit, he filled me up with a joy that I'd never felt. And I was just like, I just started to cry. And I was sitting there crying, sitting in church by myself. And I left church that day. And what had happened was I'd been born again. I didn't know what that was, but I went home and I opened the Bible and I went to the New Testament and I started reading. And in the Gospel of John, this religious leader goes to Jesus at night. His name's Nicodemus, and he doesn't want to be seen with Jesus because at this point he's basically like a pastor working in the church kind of deal. And they're teaching the Old Testament. And, you know, the Jewish people are very religious. Nicodemus was a religious leader. And so he didn't want to be seen with Jesus. So he goes to him at nighttime and he goes to ask him basically, how do I get to heaven? And Jesus, like he does a lot of times, answers this question before it's actually even asked. He said, assuredly, you must be born again to inherit the kingdom of God. And Nicodemus goes, well, how can I be born again? I'm a grown man. Well, you won't be born again in the physical sense. You'll be reborn in the spiritual sense. And Nicodemus goes, well, how can that be? And Jesus said, the Spirit of God is like the wind. You don't see where it's coming from or where it's going, but you see the effect it has on things. I go, wow, I've been born again. And I started reading these other verses in the Bible where it talks about how once the Holy Spirit of God dwells inside of you, God will start to give you new desires. And he'll start to take away some of those desires that are sinful, and he'll start to replace them with good desires. So I've been walking with Jesus for 16 years.
Did you become a pastor at some point?
Yeah, I did 4 years of youth ministry, and now I actually work in a prison as a correctional officer. So I've kind of taken the ministry in a different direction a little bit.
But yeah, because I heard at the X Games you would lead like a Sunday service.
Yeah, so I was doing a chaplaincy at the X Games for about 5 years.
Did you find the athletes were receptive to that?
Super receptive. And you know, like when I kind of pushed that to ESPN, I just told them, I said, hey, the thing about extreme sports is that these guys are risking their lives. And I look at professional baseball and I look at professional football, and these guys have a chaplain and he's there to support the team. And those are like not sports that you're typically going to like die at. I mean, we're extreme sports, like, you know, you could die every time you step to compete because you know you got to push yourself to the 10th degree to win. And I said, so if sports like baseball and football have chaplains, there's no reason that we shouldn't have a chaplain for the X Games. And they said, well, you know, you can come and do that. We're not going to pay you anything or help you out with, you know, expenses, but you can come here and do that. And so I did it for about 5 years, and then there was a kind of a changing in the guard, and the guy that took over saw no reason for a chaplain. He wouldn't give me credentials where I could get where the riders are. So he basically put me in with the friends and family, like down at the bottom of the event, and I just told him, like, basically if one of these guys gets hurt and they're laying there paralyzed, I want to be able to be there for the family who's going through that. That's what a chaplain does. You're there to, like, share the burden with them. Even when there's no answers to be given, you're just there to support them. And also to pray for the athletes before they go, because, you know, there's a lot of butterflies, and, you know, to pray for somebody before they risk something, it really does make a difference. So I'd pray with Shaun White, you know, I prayed with him a lot, and prayed with a lot of the top guys there. And, you know, it's kind of unfortunate that it came to an end, but it was good there for a while.
It's interesting for me because there is very little to no religion in extreme sports.
Yeah, you know, motorsports, they recognize the need for a chaplain. And if you watch NASCAR or you watch motocross, they have a chaplain come out and pray before every event, you know, and they pray in Jesus' name. If that offends somebody, hey, sorry, but, you know, to be honest with you, you know, we're a country that started with a Christian faith. And, you know, if you choose to not believe in Jesus, that's fine. But, you know, we still are in a country where you look at a dollar bill and it says, "In God we trust." And we should pray before events that God would bless these athletes with safety and be with their families and friends. You know what I mean? Like, it's just crazy to me that people think that that's wrong. It's like, how's that wrong?
Right, right. So was there a Jim Rippey before you were born again that was like a partier? Like, were you like with the Rankwits and Roaches of the world, you know, getting tweaked and drinking beer and smoking weed?
As far as partying goes and stuff like that, yeah, I used to party, and it's interesting, you know, when I first started snowboarding with my friend Brad Turner, I remember him introducing me to smoking weed, and I got addicted to smoking weed, and I smoked weed for 10 years, and I went to the parties and drank and, you know, did all that stuff. And, you know, fortunately for me, because my focus was on being successful at a snowboard career, I couldn't go and do that all the time. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I'd smoke weed when I could, but when I was trying to go film, I was trying to, you know, get something done. And same with alcohol. It's like, you know, I'd go out and drink and stuff here and there, but I had to keep tabs on it. It's like after you do it a little bit, you realize that's not how you want to be doing it, because you just feel like crap. I remember winning a contest so hungover that I threw up twice before I got to the event.
Wow.
Yeah, it was at Sugar Bowl here. A good friend of mine had a birthday party, and I was like, man, I got a contest the next day. I probably shouldn't go. Okay, I'll just go and have a couple drinks. And I went and ended up doing a bunch of shots with him and drank more than I should have. The next day, got up, felt like crap, drove up Old 40, which is one of the ways to get up to Donner Summit to get to Sugar Bowl. Had to pull over, threw up, got to the parking lot, threw up again in the parking lot,
Wow.
and just felt like my face was green. Like I just felt, super nauseous.
Yeah.
But just thought, you know what, I got to get up there and I got to try. So I went up there and got signed up and everything, went up. It was a big air contest. And the venue was 3 jumps and 2 out of the 3 count. I always like formats that would give you a little bit more freedom to like really go for it. So maybe give us 3 jumps and our best jump counts.
Yeah.
So if we crash a couple times, it's not the end of the world. But this one was 2 out of your 3 jumps count. So that means I got to take my hardest trick and I got to land it twice.
Yeah.
And this trick I can only land half the time anyway.
Yeah.
And I just I was hungover and nauseous. I remember I crashed my first jump and I thought, dude, what the heck? Now you got to land your next 2 jumps. And was able to land my next 2 jumps, and I won the contest.
Nice.
But I remember going like, dude, you got so fortunate that you won, but I never want to do that again.
Yeah.
I never want to show up at a contest feeling like I felt today. That was just stupid.
Oh, man.
So sometimes when you're young, you can pull stuff off like that off. But as you know, as we get older, you realize, okay, I can't do that anymore.
Who were the guys that you rode with? I feel like you were like a one-man crew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Were you kind of a loner there, or did you get to ride a lot with, you mentioned Terrier, or Craig, or even Gooch would have been on the team at that point?
Yeah. So, I mean, every once in a while, we would, like you said, I kind of did my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're working with the film crews, it's typically going to be 2 or 3 riders. If you get more than 2 or 3 riders, it's too much. And, if say you're on a steep face and maybe there's 1 or 2 cliffs, well, there's only so many landings, we're only going to get a couple tries here.
Yeah.
Or if you have a jump, if you have more than 3 riders hitting that jump, it's going to get messed up really fast. So, I would go out sometimes with whoever was filming with Standard Films that day, or whoever was filming with MacDog that day. But as far as having like a partner in crime that I went and filmed with all the time, I never had that, just kind of because of where I came from. Like a lot of these guys, they come up through the amateur and pro ranks together. And so they have a friend that they've kind of made it at the same time. And so they have that to share. But I didn't really have that because, I was kind of coming from like a little mill town, kind of just doing my own thing. So as I made it to pro, a lot of the guys that I rode with, they didn't make it to be pro. So they didn't go on the photo shoot, or they didn't go on this film trip. So I kind of, was on my own quite a bit. But I made a lot of friends that I would have made no other way had I not been a pro snowboarder. So it was neat.
Do you keep in touch with any of your old teammates?
Not really. I mean, you know how it is when you get married and have a kid.
Yep.
And work a full-time job, you're pretty much like consumed by that. Every once in a while, I'll run into somebody. Dave Downey will give me a call every once in a while since he's a Christian brother, he'll hit me up sometimes. And I'll talk to him every once in a while. And I'll see people in Tahoe. There's still some Tahoe locals that I run into. Like I'll run into Tom Burt, or I'll run into, the Hatchets, and I still see people every once in a while, but as far as hanging out with them all the time, like there's still a few people in the Reno, Tahoe area that I still run into.
And then do you still shred? Do you take your son snowboarding?
Yeah, so he's on skis right now.
Yep.
And we got him a squaw pass the last couple of years. And so I would go a few times with him, maybe a handful of times a year. So usually when I go ride now, it's just going with him. So I don't really I just don't have that much extra time.
You got a couple more years until he's at that perfect age. I've done that with my kids. My kids are 17 and 13. Now we just go and hit the park together, which is awesome. Or if it's a POW day, we go ride POW together. It's like the best thing ever. Have you kind of gone away from snowboarding just as life got busy?
Yeah. I planned on being a professional snowboarder for longer than I got to. Basically what happened was Burton hired a new team manager and a new marketing manager. Both of them were from Europe. Mm-hmm. And they came in and kind of cleaned shop, and they got rid of half of our team. Mm-hmm. And I was at the end of a 3-year deal, and they said, hey, we're not going to renew your contract. So I was like, okay. So then I went out and I tried to do it for another year. And in that time, one day I went out to go filming, and I went into the backcountry and I snowmobiled back to the steep face, and the Hatchets were filming some of these other riders, and I was kind of looking at some lines and sitting there looking at it, and the Lord spoke to my heart, and he said, you've been there and you've done that, and it's time to let it go. And I remember just kind of freaking out, being like, wow, that's a tough pill to swallow. And I said, okay, Lord, if you want me to give it up, my prayer is that you'd take away my desire to do it, because I don't want to give it up and then like have a lot of regret. I don't want to Jones for it. And so if you want me to let it go, I'm fine with that, but just take away my desire to do it. So I took my wife to dinner that night, and I told her, I said, hey, I'm done snowboarding. And I remember I started to cry when I told her that, because, you know, for 15 years that had been my life. And so since then, he answered that prayer, and I don't Jones for it. I mean, sometimes I'll see it on TV or watch like stuff on like Facebook, you know, videos on YouTube and stuff like that of like who's winning the contest now. I'll see that, or I'll see, you know, maybe Travis Rice riding some steep POW, and I'll go, oh man, that looks fun, you know. But I just realized that right now in my life, you know, the Lord's got something different for me to do, and you know, one of these days I'll ride some powder with him in heaven, and it'll be perfect, and we won't have to wait for the helicopter, and it's gonna be sweet.
Jim, thank you so much for talking to me for so long, dude.
Cool, man.
This has been absolutely a dream, dude. Thank you very, very much.
Awesome. Thanks for reaching out to me. God bless you, brother. And hopefully we can share some turns somewhere down the road.
That'd be killer, Jim. Thanks again.
Cool, buddy. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Big FNRad shout out to Jim Rippey. Thanks for doing that interview. Big thank you to Myro from Spy and Mike Straddle from Vans. Mike's given me some prizes to give out, so I'm going to use those to hopefully boost the show. If you go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review, the first 6 people, I'm going to send out this swag, which includes some socks and some stomp pad stuff. Oh, limited edition 50th anniversary mugs or beer steins or something. I haven't opened the box, but I'm going to send this stuff out to you guys. Thanks to Mike Straddle from Vans for that. Thanks to all our listeners. You guys listened right to the end. I never listen all the way to the end unless my hands are busy delivering mail. Come back next week for another episode of the FNRad Snowboarding Podcast, brought to you by BR Productions.